Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Ingeborg and I am trying to adjust the camera so that you can see a bit. And my notes keep going offline. Is that in focus? Okay. Hello. Welcome to my channel. My name is Ingeborg. This is my Stitch With Me videos. For those who are new, this is not your regular kind of Stitch With Me videos. I like to discuss more controversial topics in these. Well, I try and start to stitch a bit. Information on this project I will add in the description box down below. Yeah, my Stitch With Me videos are just an idea I had to talk about rules and regulations in my country, the Netherlands, which is considered by other countries sometimes to be more liberal in some respects. So I thought it would be interesting to share with you what those maybe more liberal views could be and the reasoning behind them. I want to mention that this is not meant as a lecture on how things should be in the world. It is just my way of sharing how things work in my country. And I have tried to research the topic and give an accurate representation that, you know, I'm sure I miss out details. I'm sure I'm not always using the correct terms because I'm not a lawyer. And I just Google and translate that way. So again, this is not meant to be an in-depth lecture on how things should be. It's just an explanation of a topic that might interest you. Now I have to pause again because my screen keeps going black and that's where my notes are at. Let's see if you are at least seeing something. I will try and keep my hands out of sight, but I'm not promising anything. Today's subject is the Dutch drug policy, or as we call it, gedoogbeleid, which is a policy of tolerance towards soft drugs. And if this is not your topic, you know, if you're not interested, that's fine. If you may not like what you hear because of personal circumstances or beliefs, that's fine. Feel free to go check out another video. Also feel free to stay and listen and share your thoughts. And try and be polite about it, like I'm trying to be. So I said it was a topic of drug policy and not a topic of legalizing soft drugs. And the reason is that although we may have the reputation, drugs are actually still, soft drugs and hard drugs are actually still illegal in the Netherlands. Which means that any form of making or growing or selling or possessing drugs is illegal in the Netherlands, which may confuse some people. And that's the point of the tolerance policy. It may be legally or it may be illegal according to our laws, but certain circumstances we tolerate usage or selling. So I might have to add that officially the use of soft drugs is not mentioned in our laws, so technically that is actually legal, although possession isn't. And it is also legal since, I don't know, 2000 something to prescribe medicinal cannabis. So again, we're not talking about legalizing soft drugs, we are talking about a policy of condoning soft drugs. And why do we have this policy? Officially, the reasoning behind it was that soft drugs are considered less hazardous to your health than hard drugs. And policymakers at the time thought, sorry, I have to count. 1, 2. At the time thought that the police body would be better used for catching the hard drugs criminals instead of the few hobby cannabis smokers that enjoy a spliff every now and then. And besides that, they figured that soft drugs were considered less hazardous, so that's how they came up with the idea of condoning certain soft drugs under specific circumstances. And those circumstances are that the cannabis, it's only for cannabis, it's only that certain shops are allowed to sell it. And I have to count again. Only certain shops are allowed to sell it. You can only possess a limited amount. You're still not allowed to grow it or supply it. And if you are caught with the condoned amounts, they will still be confiscated. And we've had this policy since the 1970s, which means we were one of the first countries to actually adopt this way of dealing with soft drugs. I'm trying to keep to a standard format for these types of discussions, so like in the previous video, I will discuss briefly what our current legislation is, then move on to a bit of personal note, and then move on to current issues and other countries. The current this is such a hard word. The current legislation, as I said, is that it is illegal to have, to grow, to sell, to possess drugs in the Netherlands. Under strict conditions, some possession and selling of specific soft drugs is tolerated. And the specific soft drugs that are tolerated are only cannabis and so hashish or weed. Now, if you're not familiar, you might need to know, well, not necessarily need to know, but I thought it might be interesting to let you know the difference between hashish and weed. So when you're talking about weed, we call it wheat. That is actually the dried, pulverized tips of the flowers of the cannabis plant. Looks kind of like oregano, dried oregano. Hashish or hash is kind of a waxy buildup that the plant has on it, and they have to sieve it off and then sort of knead it together, and that makes this sort of waxy paste which sort of looks like stock cubes. That's hash. That's the difference. There are not really any differences. Some people say that there are differences in effect, but that's more related to the strength of the plant and the THC level of it than to the difference between weed or hash. So what are the specific rules that people, or that are okay, start again. So what are the specific circumstances in which soft drugs are tolerated? For selling, it is that only specific shops are allowed to sell these soft drugs, and we call them coffee shops. So don't think you can go to a coffee shop and get a nice cup of coffee. Well, you can, but it's mainly to buy hash or weed. Don't tell me why, don't ask me why they're called coffee shops, because I didn't check and I really don't know. So I might have to look that up if there is some sort of explanation for that, but yeah. So the coffee shops are the only shops that are allowed to sell, and they have to trying to look for the word here, comply with a set of regulations, and those are that they are not allowed to sell more than 5 grams of cannabis per day per person, per client. They're not allowed to sell hard drugs, which is common sense. They're not allowed to sell to minors, so less than 18 years old. They're not allowed to have minors in the shop. They're not allowed to serve alcohol. They're not allowed to advertise or market drug sales. They're not allowed to cause a nuisance in the neighborhood. They're not allowed to have a stock of over 500 grams of cannabis. They're not allowed to sell to non-residents of the Netherlands, and non-residents also are not allowed in the shop. I will come back to that later. And they're not allowed to be located near a school within 350 meters. That is also something I will come back to. So quite a few rules, not that many, but you know, just rules to try and keep stocks to a minimum, try and keep usage to a minimum by limiting it. Although if you really want a lot of hash, you can go to several coffee shops in one day and get 5 grams at each shop. But yeah, anyway. So for individuals, what are the rules? You are not allowed, officially again, you're not allowed to grow plants. Up to 5 is tolerated, so you can grow up to 5 cannabis plants. And it is tolerated, but if police come to your garden and see that you are growing cannabis, they will actually confiscate the plants. They will not prosecute, but they will confiscate. And then you're not allowed to have more than 5 grams in your possession. You will be prosecuted if you have more than 5 grams in your possession. So the example I was just mentioning about going to several shops, if you get caught, you will be prosecuted. It's not allowed to smoke cannabis near schools or on school premises. That's about it for the individual. So again, if you're allowed to carry 5 grams, but if you get caught, they will confiscate. So in festivals, things like that, where there are pretty strict drug checks, they will confiscate your cannabis. Yeah. So those are the specific rules for individuals and shops. And then on to numbers, statistics. I looked up information about how many people in the Netherlands actually use cannabis or say they use cannabis. Hang on. And I'm just going to flip to check. Yeah, thought I might have a knot there. Are we still in focus? Sort of, yeah. we have a sort of a national drug agency that monitors drug usage and drug-related incidents, and they did a study in 2017, and that showed that last year 1 in every 14 people aged 18 or older said they had used cannabis in 2017. So that's about 7% of our population say that last year they have used at least once cannabis. About 25% of all adults say that they have used cannabis at some point in their life. So not necessarily last year, but some point in their life. Compared to other countries in Europe, that makes us number 9 on the list of people using drugs, soft drugs. So, yeah, I would say not that high. There are other countries that have more cannabis usage. I don't know if that is because we have sort of tolerated it for longer, so the novelty is wearing off, I don't know. But yeah, so about 7% of adults have said they used cannabis in the last year, and about 25% have said they used it sometime in their life. Now then comes the more interesting thing, in my opinion. This is the minors, the underage children, school children. Of the 16-year-olds that were in the survey, about 25% said that they had used cannabis sometime in their life, in 2015 that was. So about a quarter of our young kids, at least once, have used cannabis, which is comparable to the adults who have said the same amount of people say they have once in their life at least used cannabis. And now my screen is switching off back again. And now, furthermore, that was only 16-year-olds sometime in their life. Studies have shown that the amount of high school students in total that have used cannabis has decreased. So in 1996, about 22% of all students used cannabis regularly, and this has dropped to 11% in 2016. So it's halved in 30 years, 20 years. Mind you, I was not in high school anymore in 1996, but I will get to that. I'm trying to see where I am at. Okay. So there's a lot of studies about usage of soft drugs and other kinds of drugs amongst high school students and young people in general. I didn't have time to dive into all the details, but yeah, pretty high amount of students have used or are still using cannabis in the Dutch high schools. It must be said that if you look at like numbers for 12 or 13-year-olds, they are significantly lower. There are very few 12 or 13-year-olds who say that they have ever used cannabis. So it starts around maybe 15 years old that the numbers start to increase a bit more. So maybe 15-year-olds it would be 10%, and 16-year-olds it would be 25%. So still quite a number of kids. And this is not going well. And again. Next part is how many people in the Netherlands actually support this policy. Now, this is a bit more tricky because it is but you could say, you know, if up to 25% of the population has ever used soft drugs, you can assume maybe that those people would not be against the use of soft drugs or the tolerance of soft drugs. So I would say at least 25% has no problems with it, but I could be wrong. Let's move this out of the way. But yeah, I don't have any numbers on the general public, but I do have numbers from municipalities, because municipalities have to make their own policies whether or not they will tolerate soft drugs. So the total number of soft drugs in the Netherlands has dropped from close to 900 in the 1999, so just before the turn of the century, to at the moment last year we had just over 550 coffee shops. So it's almost halved. There are a total of 380 municipalities in the Netherlands, and in only about 100 of those are coffee shops actually tolerated, are allowed. So there's a lot of municipalities that don't allow coffee shops, so don't allow selling of soft drugs. About 60% of all municipalities actually have a zero tolerance policy. So they really don't allow any soft drugs nor coffee shops. So that's quite high, I would say. Considering it's tolerated, it's and not actually tolerated in more than half of the country. Trying to check if I'm still doing the right thing here. Yep. Also, I found some information because, of course, like everything else, there is still selling of soft drugs through illegal channels, so like sellers that sell from their homes, things like that. And it is an estimate that is about 30% of all soft drugs that are sold through these illegal channels, so that's quite high. And I think it has to do... Oh, okay, are we still recording? I hope so. Let me check. Yes, still recording. Okay, so basically I don't have any numbers of the general public, but it seems that most municipalities actually don't tolerate soft drugs, but those who want to can. So my personal experience with this topic, as I mentioned in previous Stitch With Me, I thought it would be interesting to add some personal notes, just not to sway your opinion, but just to share my experiences, that's all. And I have to admit, my experiences on soft drugs are extremely limited. I was a high school student in the 90s, no, in the 80s actually, and a student at the university in the 90s. And I have come across cannabis, and I have tried it, I think once or twice maybe. And I must say it didn't do much for me. So, wasn't really my thing. But yeah, in those circles you would come across soft drugs, and also things like pills or, you know, ecstasy, that kind of thing, which is illegal, by the way, and not tolerated. But yeah, I don't really enjoy it. It's not for me. Yeah, I don't really understand the fun of sitting on your arse and doing nothing but grinning. But yeah, so not for me, not my cup of tea. But you know, yeah, whatever. Well, that was interesting. I hope you still alive, because that was not what I wanted to do. But yeah, it did happen. You did fall. And I'm trying to continue from where I left off. And I was talking about, our current events about and current discussions about soft drugs. So we've had this tolerance policy since the 70s, and it has had some adaptations. And the most recent ones have had to do with the fact that, I guess, with the combination of airfare being more and more cheap, tourism and the general level of wealth being better, people going abroad for holidays more often. We've had some issues with drug tourism. So some of our latest adaptations to this policy are related to that, and also to help make it a little bit less easy for young kids to come in contact with soft drugs. So one of the adaptations was that coffee shops are no longer allowed to be near high schools. They have to be at least 350 meters away from schools, which has led to the closing down of some shops because they were too near. It led vice versa to interesting situations where when a coffee shop was already established and a new school was planned to come to that area, coffee shops have actually lodged objections for that, to stop schools from being established, because it would mean that the coffee shops would have to close. So that's an interesting aspect of it. But yeah, so not near schools, and at school premises it's no longer allowed or tolerated. To try and stop the drug tourism, there has been an addition of ruling that only Dutch residents are allowed inside coffee shops and allowed to buy from coffee shops. And Dutch residents are people that don't necessarily are of Dutch nationality, but they have to live in a Dutch municipality and be registered there. And it's up to the coffee shop owners to actually enforce this rule by asking for an ID and for an extract of the population register, which of course means that no one actually does that, because an ID people always carry, because that's actually the law. But no one carries around an extract from the population register. So about 92% of coffee shops actually don't check. So it's not actually working in order to stop drug tourism. As if you ever visit Amsterdam, you will definitely discover. There's a very recent initiative that has gone to our parliament in the last year, which actually focuses on closing the gap, and by that they mean coffee shops are allowed to sell cannabis, but they are not allowed to purchase it from suppliers, and they are not allowed to grow cannabis. So actually they might legally, in quotes, sell it to their customers, but they have to acquire it by illegal action. And to keep better control on the supply, they have actually proposed this initiative policy where if this passes, it will make it legal to grow and sell to coffee shops cannabis, but it will be highly regulated. So with that they aim to get better quality control on like the uses of pesticides and things like that, but also on the level of THC. This is the active substance in cannabis, and accurate amounts of hashish per packaging, so that will never be more than 5 grams and things like that. So they're trying to make the whole chain more easy to control. Thank you. No, I did not smoke anything today or any day. Well, except from years ago. So that's still being discussed. They have asked for some additional questions to be answered, and as far as I'm aware, they have not done that yet. So, and then the final thing that recently popped up again is the topic of the health aspect of soft drugs. As I stated in the start of this video, the reason why soft drugs are tolerated is because of the belief that they are less damaging to your health than hard drugs, and therefore let's focus on the hard drugs and stopping that instead of focusing on soft drugs. But throughout the years, more and more evidence has come up that soft drugs is not as harmless as people assumed in the 70s. Hang on 1 second. Trying to see what you see. Okay. Sorry about that. More and more evidence has turned up that actually cannabis might be more harmful than we originally thought, like with many things. Actually, there are several studies that have shown that smoking cannabis is actually worse than smoking tobacco in some cases. Some say that is because of the fact that cannabis is inhaled more deeply into your lungs. Not sure if that's really true, but they have shown with scientific studies that people who smoke cannabis regularly over a longer time period are more likely to get lung cancer than tobacco smokers in some cases. So yeah, definitely not that healthy. It's also proven to be more addictive than some people assumed back in the 90s or the 70s. Since the turn of the century, 2000, more and more people have checked themselves into rehab clinics with cannabis addiction. In the 1990s, it was still considered that you couldn't be addicted to cannabis. And there's recently also more evidence that uses of soft drugs by minors could have longer lasting effect on concentration levels, as well as maybe even psychological development. So that's a major concern. What am I doing? Oh, okay. Let's try again. So we're coming to the end of this video, which is excellent because I was aiming for about half an hour and I will have to cut out some bits, so I'm assuming that it will actually be only about half an hour, and I'm actually still okay. Just the last bit of my video was cut off, so I'm actually a little bit further on at the moment. But I was wrapping up by saying that last bit I wanted to mention was the rules in other countries in the world. The Netherlands may have been one of the first to have a policy for tolerance of soft drugs, but it's definitely not anymore, the only one at least. There are several countries in Europe, in South America, who have some form of policy regarding tolerance and or medicinal cannabis. There's only one place, as far as I could tell, that actually always has had legal cannabis, which is Uruguay. They do have supervised growers and things like that, but cannabis, as far as I could tell, was never illegal there. That's the only country in the world. Then there are several places where, like some states in the United States, and countries like Australia, Russia, Canada, where some form of tolerance or use of medicinal cannabis is allowed. So I will put in the description box, I put a link to a Wikipedia site with an overview of all countries and how legal or how tolerant they are towards cannabis. And that's actually just about all I had to say about this topic. I did underestimate the amount of information that was available to me, so I am sure that I was a bit brief on certain areas, or may not have given the full information, but this is the best I could do in the time that I had. And I just thought, since our drug policy is one of the big things that people know about when you say you're from the Netherlands, they usually look at you with a vague expression, and then you say, you know, Holland, Amsterdam, and you see the recognition coming, and usually one of the first things that they will mention is our drug policies. So yeah, I thought I might as well discuss it with you guys. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it here and try and edit this thing together somehow. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm interested to hear what you thought of it, and I do appreciate the feedback from the previous video, especially how civilized everybody was able to stay. So we're very curious to see how controversial this topic actually is to you. Anyway, that's it for me. I will talk to you again later. Bye guys.